After the ship docked, Paul Wieser accompanied the coxswain in the ship's whaleboat to take damage control around the North Carolina and see how she was sitting in the water. The little skiff plowed through the thick oil and floating trash as it slowly skimmed along. He was within touching distance of the debris still floating in the water. They approached the wreckage of the Arizona, sunken so deeply in the harbor that the level of the captain's cabin on the superstructure was even with the waterline. The skiff rounded the bow and slipped along the side, the wake rippling the water and moving one of Arizona's porthole covers back and forth, creaking as it swung. Wieser shuddered. Goosebumps ran along his arms, and the hair on the nape of his neck rose. Wieser knew that in that wreckage was his teenage idol from back home in New Jersey. Henry Schroeder was a hometown hero. Everyone knew he was serving on the Arizona, and they later learned that he was buried with her. The war became real for Wieser that day, and he wondered what the future held for him. Fortunately, the future held some good times. In March 1943, the ship returned to Pearl Harbor for repairs to a propeller. During Liberty, Paul bought a diamond ring. Didn't have any idea when he'd be back home to propose, so he packed up the ring and sent it to his brother. He said, "Have a party and propose to Jean for me." And he did, and she said yes. And more than a year later, the ship returned to Bremerton, Washington. And he's talking about it going back to Bremerton. There was this one time during the whole war that it went back to the States for repair. That was it. During that 28-day leave, Paul and Jean were married. After the war, they started a family and had 3 sons. But Paul raised those boys by himself because Jean died not long after the 3rd one was born.
Oh, wow.
After Paul retired from the fire department in New Jersey, I told you the guys loved their ship. Paul moved to Wilmington from New Jersey because he wanted to be close to the ship that he loved. And by then, it was moored as a memorial to all North Carolinians killed during World War II. He volunteered on the ship for years. He gave tours on the ship. And then he met Millie, and they married, and he moved to Virginia. But every year, he returned for reunions in the spring and Constitution Day in the fall, which was also his birthday. And Paul always rang the ship's bell in honor of the signing of the Constitution that he fought to defend. To tell you a little story about Paul, he was such a help when I was working on the book, and I'd call him in Virginia, and he'd say, he'd tell me answers, you know, I'd ask, where'd you stand when you did this? How'd you do this? How much did this projectile weigh? He said, I can't hear on the phone very good, let me come see you. He's 85 years old, he gets in his car, he drives 6 hours to my house, and spent 3 days with us. He took me back and forth to the ship every day, and he gave me tours all over the ship and told me this and that and everything I needed to know. And then I guess it was the next week maybe, or a couple of weeks later, when he got home, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And the doctor didn't give him much time, and he told him he'd probably never make it back to the ship. But Paul had other ideas. So this is in the fall. He went back the next April for the reunion, and in 2006. And then his last trip was on September 17th, 2006. His birthday and Constitution Day. And I love this picture of Paul because he's looking at the ship's bell. And every ounce of love that he had for that ship and for his country are shining in his eyes. Paul died just a few months later in December of that year. And during his funeral in Virginia, Fellow shipmate Fred Vellentri traveled from his home in Rhode Island to stand sentinel at Paul's casket, and he had a broken leg, but he came. And until the day he died, Fred traveled all over the country to bestow that same honor upon his fellow shipmates, but also to help their widows, to help their families. He went to Georgia or Alabama to plant a garden for the widow of one of his shipmates. He just did that during his whole life. And for his 90th birthday, he went south. So Fred was definitely one of a kind.